Welcome to the podcast for the World Builders, where we dive into the spells and strategies for Black feminist world building and creative actualization. Y'all, it's been a minute. And I am so excited to be back. So these weekly podcasts or weekly-ish, as you can see, we took a little bit of a break to settle in with the folks who are currently in the Cedar World retreat. We're on week 6, so kind of nearing the end of the 9-week retreat. But um, we're starting these podcasts back up. And these weekly podcasts and the newsletters that have continued even during the retreat season, both of them, podcasts and newsletters, are presented by Cedar School, where all this Black feminist theory, creative theory that we talk about in the podcasts and newsletters inside of Cedar School, it's where like the theory meets practice, right? And if you've had the recurring desire to generate recurring revenue that resources your creative practice, then download the Cedar School Creative Offer Questionnaire to Oneself. This worksheet will help you get clarity on the creative offer, on your creative offer, like on the creative offer on your heart, and even features Audre Lorde's quotes that you can cut out and tape to your journal, mirror, studio wall, wherever you want to place them. The link to download the questionnaire can be found in the show notes, so head there if you want to grab that. But I am so honored to be learning and practicing alongside you today and always. If this is your first episode, thank you for tuning in. And if you are returning, thank you so much for coming back, y'all. I love recording these. I love this kind of like asynchronous time, synchronous time that we spend together. So thank you for tuning in. But if you are returning, then you kind of know you're familiar with our podcast ritual. So before diving in, we're going to ground ourselves in our sensorium. We're going to give ourselves permission to breathe into this present moment, right? We're going to take just one quick beat. We can always just take a moment to become aware of our surroundings, right? To get curious about what's happening inside our sensorium. So I'm going to take 3 deep, full belly breaths and invite you to do the same if that feels possible and safe in this moment. Let's begin. Mm. Long, long, long exhale on that last one. Um, let's note one thing in our sensorium, something that we can see, touch, smell, taste, hear, something we can feel beyond the senses we have language for. Me personally, I smell like this rose sandalwood incense burning in the background. I can kind of hear my laptop fan uh, collaborating with me in this moment. And as I was breathing, I kind of had this compassionate touch, hand on my heart, and I felt the rhythm of the blood flowing through me. What can you sense in this very moment? Now let's check in on our mood and intention right now in this very moment, right? So we're grounding into the present. That's also a part of the practice. And if I think about my mood and intention, my mood first is excited because I will be surrounded by family very, very soon. And I'm looking forward to love carrying me to the end of the week. I'm looking forward to love carrying me always, but this week, um, like I'm just going to be flanked on all sides by loved ones, and I really can't wait. What's your mood? How are you arriving? Can we give ourselves 3 seconds, right, to feel what we feel without judgment? We do so much judging, right? Let's feel what we feel without judgment in this moment. Now, what about your intention for listening to this? My intention for recording this episode is to remind us there is no such thing as an independent artist. My intention is to invite us to script and rehearse stories rooted in the ontological truth of our interdependence. My intention is to remind us by rehearsing stories rooted in interdependence, we are engaging in a creative practice of calling our power back to us. More on that later in the episode, but what is your intention behind listening to this episode? Now that you know my intention behind recording it. All right, like that Solange interlude, we do nothing without intention. Nothing without intention. All right, so I'm going to pause here and let you reflect on that. Now let's get into today's episode. Episode 63. All stories rooted in independence are lies, calling our power back to us. So Sonia Renee Taylor once said, all stories rooted in scarcity are lies. And that's so true, right? You've probably heard me say that on this podcast before. Similarly, though, I want to suggest all stories rooted in independence are lies. Some of us haven't surrendered to interdependence, and it shows. And well, I'll speak for myself. At least it showed up in my life. And it has transformed me in more ways than one. Right? So much unnecessary suffering, perhaps all unnecessary suffering, y'all, is born inside a resistance to our shared reality of interdependence. It's been a minute. Like I said, if you're new here, welcome to story time. If you're not new here, then you know my style. I'm a storyteller, and I'm always going to start with a story to illustrate a point and open us up, right? The personal is universal. So in 2021, I moved to Dawn, Virginia after a breakup. We both played a part in the relationship no longer working, and we both knew it was time. So we went on a little getaway in Shenandoah Valley, took lots of hikes under old growth trees, cooked meals outside in the forest together to honor and celebrate the end of the relationship. It was sweet and it was time. And at the same time, I was feeling called to return to the land where my ancestors were enslaved and have lived and stewarded this land all the way up to this point. Before that relationship that I just mentioned, I was living in Brooklyn, New York, right, working my full-time gig as a software engineering instructor, and then later moved to Richmond, Virginia to move in with my partner. At the time, we were in a long distance relationship, and I got promoted to a remote role, so it made sense. But I also have a theory that the universe introduced that relationship into my life so that I can make my way back to Dawn, right? Make my way closer to that ancestral land. But that's another podcast for another time. Let's get back to the story. In September 2019, I moved to Richmond right before the pandemic, perhaps another divine redirection, right? Moved from Brooklyn to Virginia right before the pandemic. And then in September 2020, I quit my teaching job at a coding boot camp. In the spring of 2021, my partner and I separated. And my life very quickly became unrecognizable. I did not realize kind of the the path that spirit was inviting me on. I would have to leave almost everything I knew. After that relationship ended, I had a decision to make. Do I find a software engineering job or some other tech job, right, and move back to New York? Or do I bet on myself and continue living off savings and apply for artist grants, right, while I figure out what's next? Y'all, what was next was a season of healing, grief, and surrender, so much surrender, right? More than I could have ever imagined surviving. Pain, stories, memories, trauma that I had suppressed for so long came bubbling up. And I ran away from them, ran away from those feelings for so long. I just out of this fear that I would become undone by them, that they would threaten my safety, my livelihood, my sanity, my ability to power through and press on despite it all. I built an entire life powering through and pressing on despite it all. I built a life out of sheer perseverance. So I ignored. I ignored, I ignored, I ignored. I ran and ran and ran until I couldn't run anymore. And when I stopped running, in the beginning, all I felt was shame. Shame that my life didn't look like what I thought it looked like by this age or by this time or by this whatever, right? Just juncture. Shame that I didn't have it all figured out by now. Surely I should have it all figured out by now. Shame that I needed help. Shame that I felt helpless. Shame that I was or felt immobilized by my grief. And what I couldn't see at the time was inside this stillness, I was calling my power back. Instead of powering through, I was calling my power back to me. I was stopping. I was resting. I lived in fear for so long, right? I was expanding my capacity to feel emotions other than fear. It turns out there are a lot more. And in the beginning, right, of this episode, I said that I bet on myself, but that story is a lie. I bet on the web of family, land, mutual aid, and ancestral wisdom, ancestral redirection, right? That was exactly what I needed to catch me and to hold me. And I'm forever entangled in that web. And I thank God, right? I'm on a journey of no longer being terrified of it, no longer being terrified of getting sticky in that web. Right? So much of our struggles are rooted in a fear of the fact that is utter relation. Right? Utter relation is our reality. And so much of our struggles are kind of like born in this resistance to that reality. And once I released the shame, my journey of transformation was able to unfold. And it is that journey of transformation that is now the key to my livelihood, right? The key to my survivable, my interdependent practice. The exact journey that I thought was a threat to my livelihood is the journey that now sustains it. I'm going to say that one more time because my God, what a miracle. The exact journey that I thought was a threat to my livelihood is the journey that now sustains it. This episode is about interdependence. It's a pretty wild reality. It's literally wild. It's a way of being that is reflected in every ecosystem that supports our breath, but we seem to struggle with it so much. And by struggle, I mean resist, and not the good kind, right? This is the kind of resistance that can be the root of unnecessary suffering. Intellectually, we know this. We may have heard this before. Spiritually, we may certainly know this. And still, the absolute discomfort of having needs persists, right? Maybe this like somatic discomfort of interdependence still is present, right? And we judge ourselves for having needs constantly. We judge ourselves for having desires constantly, daily. And the reality of interdependence may look different for us in different seasons of our lives, right? That is certainly true. In one season, we might need the help of family. You may need the help of our families to provide shelter, like I did, right? In another season, we might need the companionship of a partner or a pet. Right? In another season, we might need the trust and respect of our peers to engage with our work, right? In another season, we might need our communities to rally around our mutual aid requests and bids for care. These seasons may overlap and create a web of entangled relation and deep interdependence that might be in alignment with our highest good, but still may make us feel deeply uncomfortable nonetheless. We live in a society that teaches us that having needs is burdensome, right? And a moment of helplessness or moments of decentering productivity is a moment of indignity, a moment worthy of shame. These may be lies, but the feelings they produce are real. What do we do with this discomfort that might not serve us, but is definitely trying to teach us something? What do we do with this? Like, what do we do with the lie of indignity inside of a lack of independence? We create new stories rooted in the truth of interdependence, right? And then what do we do with those stories? We practice inside of them. And here's the good news. We all come to our creative practices, AKA our practices of living, with infinite data stores of wisdom with ancestral software, right? And our body might be the technology, like the hardware, right? The hardware may be the technology of our body. And our senses remember. Our senses are connected to that ancestral software, that embodied wisdom. We remember. We've practiced interdependence for much longer than we've practiced independence in the colonial sense of the word. Therefore, this work is often the practice of data retrieval. It's about a commitment to affirming what we know to be true and remembering the stories rooted in independence, our lies, all of them. All of them. This craving for cleanliness or order, right? This aversion to mess, And the entanglement of relationship is a colonial craving, and it serves us to sit with that. Get curious about it and work with ways to release it with patience and compassion. Oftentimes, our longing for independence can be born out of a culture of what am I trying to say? Neoliberalism. Yes, that's true. But also, our longing for independence can be born out of complex trauma that shows up as anxiety and a deep desire, very real desire for safety, security, reliable order, predictability. I know that. I'm familiar with that. I want us to honor that. But if there's one thing this practice has taught me, is that when I let love in, everything softens. And I can begin to peel back layers that free me, layer after layer. Right? The running stops. And I realize underneath the craving for safety is really the desire for relation that doesn't terrify me. That's so sweet, right? That's so tender. That's my inner child talking. And I'm going to say that again and redirect it from I to you. Underneath the craving for safety is really the desire for relation that doesn't terrify you. I'm going to say it one more time and redirect it from you to us because I really need us to sit with this. Underneath the craving for safety is really the desire for relation that doesn't terrify us, y'all. Mariame Kaba said on being safe, I don't believe I can possess safety because I don't think safety is a thing. I think safety is a relation, end quote. What if our creative offer is a container where we practice surrendering to interdependence? What if the practice of Black abstraction is a commitment to relation? What if our next big art project is coming back home to a body with needs and desires? All right, what happens when all at once we remember we have the power to meet those needs and ask for help, and we can't hold it alone? This too is creative collaboration. This too is creative practice. And I can't think of anything more dignified than this. To be clear, interdependence is different than codependence, right? Like we got to say that. We got to say that part. In season 1, episode 1 of Sonya Renee Taylor's new podcast, which I highly recommend, called Mundane Miracles, she reminds us, and this is a quote, when we decide that we are going to compromise the most authentic manifestation of how life moves through us to be with someone else, that's called codependence, end quote. So next week, we'll talk about the grief work of taking the long walk from the zone of validation to our zone of desire. When I talk about interdependence, I'm not talking about defining ourselves through our service to others. No, 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 no. I am talking about something much more dynamic. And I'm talking about calling our power and our agency back to us, y'all. All right. What happens when we abandon the master narratives that say dominating the needs of our bodies makes us less burdensome and more lovable, more dignified? What happens when we release the myth that independence is safer, less messy, less precarious than interdependence? What new stories might we remember, script, rehearse, act out, embody? What new worlds might be born out of this interdependent rehearsal? My inner child trying to see something, and I bet yours is too, right? Because she me and she you. Okay, we're coming to a close. This is my invitation this week. Remember when I said the exact journey that I thought was a threat to my livelihood is the journey that now sustains it? I want you to reflect on, or I want to invite you to reflect on and journal about the fears that might be stopping you from taking action aligned with your desire, right? The stories that might be making your desire hard to access inside your imagination, inside your dreams, inside your body. Are there any, like, are any of these fears rooted in an aversion to interdependence? Let's look at that. Are any of these fears rooted in an aversion to vulnerability, an aversion to being seen, an aversion to being held accountable? And when I say being seen, y'all, I just real quick want to clarify because I feel like this is being thrown around so much. I'm not talking about being seen on TikTok or Instagram or LinkedIn or wherever. I'm talking about being witnessed in the fullest expression of your divinity. Okay. Being perceived in the fullest capacity of your power. That's what I'm talking about as it relates to being seen. Us being mirrors to each other's desire, us bouncing off each other and amplifying, right? The erotic life that is us, that is our breath, that is our presence here together on this earth at this time. Right? So let's journal about if any of our fears stopping us from taking action aligned with our desire are actually somehow rooted in this aversion or this discomfort with the reality that is interdependence and relation. Let's look at that. Let's face that, right? The more we can be honest with ourselves, the more we can honor ourselves, right? Thomas Berry says that we are in between stories. I think that's true. I want to invite us to choose the story that calls our power back to us. Y'all, truly, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the podcast for the World Builders, where we dive into the spells and strategies of Black feminist world building while exploring how offering, right, the skills and wisdom from our journey of transformation might seed, resource, and deepen creative practices rooted in collective liberation. I firmly believe that we all came into this world creative, that we all came into this world with something to offer. And deep down, that we all want to orient around politics of love instead of politics of fear. I know that to be true down to my bones. And these are the beliefs that we try to honor inside of Cedar School as well. So, like I mentioned at the top of the episode, feel free to download Cedar School's creative offer questionnaire to oneself to speculate with us and Audre Lorde on how you might create a container for practicing interdependence that sustains you. So link is in the show notes for you to download that. But as always, this podcast will forever be free. And the best way to support it is by sharing it with a friend or taking a screenshot or a screen recording of the episode, pulling some quotes from it and sharing it on social media so other world builders can find us. This really helps because you will never, and I mean never, it's just a part of the Black feminist values of my practice and Cedar School. You will never see a Cedar School ad while scrolling the metaverse, right? So I am putting my faith in you and the work instead. Cedar School deeply relies on word of mouth to keep the lights on. So tell a friend to tell a friend if you want to keep these episodes coming. And I heard rating and leaving a review, whether it's on Apple or Spotify, helps too. And the second best way to support is by becoming a paid subscriber to the Cedar School Substack at $5 a month. But only if you have the financial capacity and you feel like you're getting value from these dispatches from me to you. Until next week, y'all. So be it. See to it. Breathe through it.